I arrived at the house and found it empty, just a cruel note on the door. It said I should figure out life on my own. I am Eleanor, 78 years old, a former pharmacist with a heavy hand and a clear mind. They thought they left me in ruins, but they forgot to check under the kitchen floor. The cab drove off, kicking up a cloud of dust on the unpaved street, and I stood right there in front of the ochre facade that I knew better than the lines on my own hands. The silence was the first thing that didn't fit. In that house, there was always noise. The television blasting at full volume, which my daughter-in-law Giselle liked to keep on from dawn, the shouts of my grandkids fighting over the remote, or the sound of pots clashing. But that afternoon, the silence was so heavy it crawled into my ears and buzzed in my head. I was coming back from spending 3 days upstate visiting my sister Edith, who was doing poorly with her sciatica. I had left with just the clothes on my back and a small carry-on bag. Roger, my son, had kissed my forehead before putting me on the bus, telling me, "Go on, relax, Mom, we'll take care of everything here." And boy, had they taken care of it. I slipped the key into the lock. It turned with shocking ease, as if the mechanism had been recently oiled, or as if the door no longer guarded anything worth protecting. I pushed the old wood and the usual creak echoed in the hallway, but this time the echo was monstrous. There was nothing. The entryway where the mirror stand and the ceramic umbrella holder used to be was deserted. All that remained was a rectangular mark on the wall, a ghost of dust where the mirror had hung for 20 years. I felt a sudden chill, a sharp pain in my stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. I walked slowly, dragging my orthopedic shoes, my heart beating against my ribs like a caged bird. "Roger!" I called out. Even though I already knew the answer, my voice bounced off the bare walls. I stepped into the living room. They had taken everything. The green velvet sofa, the coffee table, the heavy curtains I had sewn myself a decade ago. On the floor, scraps of newspaper and old masking tape were the only witnesses to the escape. It wasn't a robbery. Thieves leave chaos, they ransack drawers, they break glass. This had been a methodical planned move executed with the precision of a surgeon excising a tumor. And the tumor, it seemed, was me. It was on the kitchen door where I found the note. It was taped at eye level with a piece of black electrical tape. It was a page torn hastily from a notebook. I recognized Giselle's sharp, nervous handwriting. "Things got difficult and we don't all fit in the new place. You have always been strong. We hope you find your way. Mom, please don't look for us. We need to start from scratch without burdens." I read the note once, twice. By the third time, the letters began to dance because tears of rage blurred my vision. It wasn't sadness I felt, I swear to you on my mother's memory. It was a white-hot fury, the kind that crawls up your spine and makes your ears burn. Without burdens. That's what they called me. I who gave them the roof they slept under. I who sold the downtown pharmacy, my beloved apothecary, to pay off Roger's gambling debts 15 years ago. I who took care of the kids when Giselle said she was depressed and went shopping all day. I let myself fall onto the kitchen floor because my legs could no longer hold me. The tiles were cold. I looked around. They had taken the stove, the refrigerator, even the light bulbs from the fixtures. They only left the trash, an old, worn-out broom in a corner, and a pile of black bags filled with clothes I recognized immediately. They were my dresses, my coats, my shawls. They had thrown them there as if they were dirty rags. I sat there on the worn hydraulic floor tiles for what felt like an eternity. I thought about Roger, my only son, a 45-year-old man who never quite learned to pull his pants up on his own, always letting himself be carried by the current, or rather by whatever woman he had by his side. Giselle never loved me. From the first day she stepped into this house, she looked at me the way you look at an old piece of furniture that clashes with the modern decor. "She smells old," she would say when she thought I couldn't hear her. But they underestimated Eleanor. They thought because I had white hair and walked slowly, my brain had shrunk too. They forgot I was a pharmacist for 40 years. I know how to measure, I know how to weigh, and above all, I know how to observe. I know the difference between a remedy that cures and a poison that kills slowly, and they had been feeding me poison in little teaspoons of contempt for years. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand. The skin on my hands is thin as rice paper covered in age spots, but underneath there is still hard bone. I took a deep breath, smelling the dust and the dampness of the empty house. "All right, Roger," I said out loud to the empty room. "All right, Giselle, you played your card, now it's my turn." I rolled onto my knees, groaning a little from the pain in my joints, and crawled toward the pantry. It was a small closet inside the kitchen, where we kept the grains, the preserves, and the dishes we hardly ever used. It was empty, of course. They had even taken the cans of tuna. But what they didn't know, what no one ever knew except my late husband Arthur and me, was that this house had secrets. Arthur was a suspicious man. He didn't believe in banks. Paper money burns, Eleanor, he always told me. Gold is eternal. I crawled into the pantry. The afternoon light came in at a slant through the kitchen window, illuminating the dust floating in the air. I headed to the darkest corner, right where a sack of potatoes we never moved used to sit. There in the corner, the wooden floorboards looked identical to the rest. Pine wood darkened by the years and the damp mop. I pulled the only blunt object I had from my purse, a small metal nail clipper and a steel file. It wasn't the ideal tool, but desperation sharpens ingenuity. I found the groove between the third and fourth boards, counting from the left wall. My fingers were trembling, not from fear, but from adrenaline. What if they had found it? What if, while moving things, while dragging the furniture, they had noticed that this board sounded hollow? My heart stopped for a second at the thought. If they had taken that, then I really was dead. Then I truly would be the helpless old woman they wanted me to be. I wedged the file into the groove. I pried it up. The wood creaked a dry sound like a bone snapping. I pushed harder, ignoring the pain in my arthritic fingers. The board gave way. It lifted a few inches, just enough for me to slip my fingers under and pull it up. The smell of damp earth and confinement hit me in the face. I set the board aside and stared into the dark hollow between the foundation. I reached my hand in, feeling around in the dark. My fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. I let out a breath that seemed to empty my lungs completely. There it was. I pulled on the handle of the metal box. It was an old toolbox, heavy, rusted on the outside, but hermetically sealed. I hauled it out with effort, dragging it into the kitchen light. I sat back down with the box between my spread legs, as if I were about to give birth to my own future. I opened it. The hinges squealed in protest after years of inactivity. Inside, wrapped in blue velvet cloths that were once part of an evening gown from my youth, were the coin tubes. American gold eagles. 1 ounce of pure gold each. Arthur had bought them one by one, month after month, during the 30 years we ran a prosperous business for our old age. "So you never have to ask anyone for anything, Ellie," he used to say. I unwrapped one of the tubes and let the coins spill into my lap. They gleamed with a brilliance that seemed to carry its own light, a heavy, intense yellow that contrasted with the misery of the empty house. $100,000 in gold, maybe more at the current market price. A fortune that fit inside a shoebox. Roger and Giselle had taken the flat-screen TV they bought on credit. They had taken the blender. They had taken the threadbare rugs, but they had left freedom behind. They had left power behind. I took one of the coins and squeezed it in my fist until the edges dug into my palm. The pain made me feel alive. It made me feel dangerous. I stood up with difficulty, clutching the box to my chest. I wasn't going to stay there crying. I wasn't going to go to a charity home. I wasn't going to go to the police to report the abandonment, because that would only make me look weak and invite pity. And I, Eleanor, didn't want anyone's pity. I looked at Giselle's note one more time, still taped to the door. I ripped it off with a sharp motion, crumpled it in my free hand, and shoved it into my jacket pocket. That note would be my fuel. Every time I felt my strength falter, every time loneliness tried to nip at my heels, I would read those words, "We hope you find your way." "Oh, I will," I muttered. And my voice wasn't shaking anymore. It sounded raspy, firm, just like when I used to kick out the drunks who came to bother the pharmacy. "I am going to find my way, and when I do, you're going to wish you had never crossed it." I walked out of the kitchen and went over to the pile of trash bags where my clothes were. I started digging. I needed a better coat because the night was going to be cold. I found my gray wool coat, the one Giselle said made me look like a beggar. I put it on, buttoned it up with dignity, straightening my spine. I packed the metal box into my carry-on bag, taking out the underwear and the knickknacks I had brought from my sister's house to make room. The weight of the suitcase was substantial now, but I didn't care. It was a sweet weight. I walked toward the front door. The empty house no longer felt like a corpse to me, but rather a shell I had just hatched from. Before leaving, I paused on the threshold. I looked back into the dark interior. "Goodbye, house," I said. "You were good, but they poisoned you." I closed the door behind me. I didn't lock it. Why bother? There was nothing left inside worth stealing, and everything worth a damn was walking right out to the street with me. Evening was falling, and the streetlights were starting to flicker. I walked to the main avenue to find a cab. I wasn't going to my sister's house. She had a good heart, but she had a big mouth and she would end up telling someone where I was. I needed to disappear so I could be reborn. A taxi pulled up. The driver, a young kid with the music blasting, looked at me in the rearview mirror. "Where to, Grandma?" The grandma comment irritated me, but I let it slide. I stroked the suitcase on my lap, feeling the outline of the metal box through the fabric. "The Emperor Hotel," I said. The kid looked at me in surprise. The Emperor was the most expensive and elegant hotel in the city, a place where foreign tourists and politicians stayed. "Hey, lady, that place is real pricey. You sure there are cheaper motels around here if you want?" I stared him dead in the eyes through the rearview mirror. I lifted my chin and gave him a half smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes but shows you're not playing games. "Young man, I didn't ask you for the price," I told him. "I told you where we are going. Drive." The kid swallowed hard, nodded, and put the car in gear. As the city rolled by, the window lights and shadows blending in the dusk, I started running numbers in my head. Not just money numbers, but time numbers. I was 78. I had maybe 5, 10, or 20 years left if I had the genetics of my Aunt Gertrude, who made it to 100. I had enough time. Time to settle in, time to transform, and above all, time to prepare the lesson my son and his wife would never forget. They thought they were throwing me in the trash. They didn't know I was a seed. We arrived at the hotel. The doorman, a tall guy in an impeccable uniform, looked at me doubtfully when he saw my old suitcase and my exhausted appearance. But I walked straight to the reception desk with my head held high, striking the marble floor with my orthopedic shoes as if they were combat boots. "Good evening," I said to the receptionist, a blonde girl who looked at me with the exact same condescension Giselle used. "I need a suite for a month." "To start, ma'am," she began using that sickly sweet voice people use for the elderly or slow children. "Our rates are quite high and we require a credit card or a cash deposit up front." I opened my handbag. I didn't pull out the gold. Of course, that would have been reckless. Instead, I pulled out a wad of cash I kept for medical emergencies in a secret coin purse, the little that was left of my pension that I hadn't handed over to them. They were old bills, but legal tender all the same. I placed $200 bills on the counter, enough for one night and a solid tip. "Tomorrow, I will go to the bank to handle the currency exchange." I lied effortlessly. "For now, take it out of this and have dinner sent up to my room. I want lobster and champagne." The girl's eyes went wide as saucers. The change in her attitude was instant. Money has that magical effect of erasing wrinkles and straightening spines in the eyes of others. "Right away, ma'am. Whose name should I register the room under?" I hesitated for a second. Eleanor. That name sounded like the woman who swept and cooked for ungrateful brats. That woman had stayed behind in the empty house. "Put it under Mrs. Montgomery," I said, using my maiden name, the one I hadn't used in 50 years. Eleanor Montgomery. As I rode up in the elevator with its gilded mirrors and red carpet, I saw my reflection. My hair was a mess, I had bags under my eyes, and the coat was a little too big on me, but my eyes were shining. They gleamed with an intensity I hadn't seen in decades. I touched the pocket where the crumpled note was. "Find your way." "I already found it," I whispered as the elevator doors opened to a brightly lit silent hallway. "And it's a road paved in gold." That night, I slept in Egyptian cotton sheets with the metal box under my pillow like a loaded gun, dreaming not of the past, but of the exquisite revenge of living well. The morning sunlight filtered through the heavy burgundy velvet curtains, drawing a line of fire across the carpet. I woke up with a start, my heart galloping in my chest, blindly reaching for the peeling wall of my bedroom in my son's house. But my fingers only found soft sheets, the kind that caressed the skin instead of scratching it. It took me a few seconds to remember the Emperor Hotel, the suite, the escape. The first thing I did was slide my hand under the pillow. My fingers brushed the cold metal of the toolbox and I let out the breath I didn't know I was holding. There was my life. There was my Arthur. I sat up in the bed, which was so massive an entire family could have slept in it, and ordered breakfast. When the waiter came in pushing the cart with silver platters and fresh coffee, he looked at me sideways. He was surely wondering what an old woman with messy hair and a worn flannel nightgown was doing in a room that cost more than he made in a month. I left a generous tip on the tray, a wrinkled bill that I smoothed out with dignity. "Thank you, young man. Clear the plates in an hour. I don't want to be disturbed." When he left, I locked the door and slid the chain into place. It was time to take inventory. I dumped the contents of the box onto the white duvet. The gold coins tumbled out with a heavy, muted clinking, a sound that no plastic card can imitate. I counted them again one by one, stacking them in columns of 10, just like I used to do with the pills in the back room of the pharmacy. 50 gold eagles. Heavy, beautiful, with Lady Liberty looking back at me with pride. I did the mental math, quickly adjusting for inflation and the market price I had heard on the radio a few days back. It was a lot of money, a hell of a lot. But I had a problem. I couldn't go to the supermarket and pay for a quart of milk with a pure gold coin. I needed liquidity, and I needed to be discreet. I got up and walked over to the full-length mirror. What I saw made me want to cry, but I swallowed the tears because the time for crying had ended yesterday on the floor of an empty kitchen. The woman in the mirror was small, hunched. Her white hair, yellowed by the cheap shampoo Giselle bought to save a few bucks, hung sadly over her shoulders. The clothes were baggy. I had lost weight these last few years, eating the leftovers and watery soups they served me. My hands shook a little. "You look like a scarecrow, Eleanor," I said out loud. But then I leaned closer to the glass and looked into my own eyes. They were dark, sunken in a net of wrinkles, but the gaze was still there. The gaze of the pharmacist who could spot a morphine addict from the front door of the shop. The gaze of the woman who had kept the books for a business for 40 years without losing a single cent. Society has a secret they never tell you until you turn 70. You become invisible. To the world, an older woman is a nuisance, a piece of furniture, or at best, a sweet little grandma who bakes cookies and doesn't understand anything. You stop being a person with desires, with intelligence, with malice. You become part of the scenery. Giselle and Roger had bet on that invisibility. They thought I would just dissolve into thin air without their charity. "We're going to use that to our advantage," I murmured, tracing a finger over my sagging cheek. "If they want to see a harmless old woman, that's exactly what they'll see until it's too late." I took a boiling hot shower using the hotel's perfumed soaps. I scrubbed my skin until it was red, washing away the smell of confinement and sorrow. I put on my best dress, the black one I wore to church, even though it was missing a button and the hem was unraveling. I tucked 3 gold coins into my coin purse, wrapping them tightly in handkerchiefs. The rest went back into the box, and the box went into the room's safe, which I locked using my late husband's birth date as the combination. I walked out of the hotel with my cane and my purse. The morning sun hit my face, but this time I didn't feel helpless. I felt like a hunter. I took a cab downtown to Jewelers Row. I knew exactly where to go. Not to the big corporate stores with the bright window displays and the security guards at the door. I was looking for Diamond Alley, a narrow strip where the old shops smelled of wood polish and deals closed with a handshake. I walked into Trust Jewelers. The name was ironic, of course. The owner, a bald man with magnifying glasses hanging around his neck, didn't even look up from his newspaper when I walked in. "Good morning," I said with a trembling voice, faking more frailty than I actually had. "We don't buy costume jewelry, lady," he replied without looking at me, turning a page. I stepped up to the counter, leaned on my cane, and pulled out one of the handkerchiefs. I untied the fabric slowly with clumsy movements, letting the silence grow thick. When the gold coin gleamed against the scratched glass of the counter, the man dropped his newspaper instantly. His eyes widened behind his thick lenses. Forgive me, mother, I didn't see clearly." His tone changed on a dime. It became oily, overly sweet. "Let me take a look at that." He picked up the coin and placed it on his digital scale. He looked at it through a loupe. I didn't take my eyes off him. I knew scales. I knew how they could be rigged with a simple tilt of the table or a poorly calibrated weight. "It's a nice piece, sure," he said, trying to sound disinterested. "But the market is down today. Gold fluctuates a lot. I can give you $800 for it. And I'm doing you a favor because I can see you need the help." I let out a dry little laugh, an old woman's cough that was actually hiding a bark of sheer contempt. 800. The coin was worth at least 2,000 at the current exchange rate. "Young man," I said, straightening my back and letting the senile old lady mask drop for a second. "I was a pharmacist for 40 years. I know what a gram weighs and I know what my gold is worth. That coin is pure gold, 1 troy ounce. The spot price of gold closed up yesterday on the stock exchange. If you want to scam somebody, wait for a tourist to walk in." The man blinked, thrown off by the shift in my tone. He looked into my eyes and saw there was no fear, only calculation. 1,800? He said, dropping the sugary voice. 2,000 in cash, big bills. And I have 2 more right here in my purse. If you treat me right, I will come back with others. If you try to steal a single dime from me, I will walk down to Greg on the corner, who has always given me a fair price. The jeweler swallowed hard. The mention of his competition sealed the deal. 1,900 each, that's my final offer. I have to flip these, lady. I gotta eat too. Deal, I said, slipping back into my role of the fragile old woman. $5,700 and a little velvet bag to carry the money in, please. I don't want to get mugged. I walked out of the jewelry store half an hour later with a heavy purse and a light heart. $5,700. It was more cash than Roger had made in the last 2 years with his failed business ventures. I walked down the pedestrian street, dodging people who were rushing by, staring at their phones. They bumped into me, brushed me with their bags, didn't even say, "Excuse me." To them, I was just an obstacle on the sidewalk, a slow old lady blocking the path of progress. I stopped in front of a window display. It was an elegant boutique, the kind where they don't put price tags on the clothes because if you have to ask, you can't afford it. There was a charcoal gray wool-tailored suit, classic cut, impeccable, and a camel-colored coat that screamed authority. The two salesgirls, young and painted up like dolls, were chatting at the counter. They saw me walk in and their eyes swept over my old clothes and my worn orthopedic shoes. They went right back to their conversation without even greeting me. "Excuse me," I said. "We'll be right with you," one of them said without looking up from her phone. I walked over to the gray suit. I touched the fabric. "Ma'am, please don't touch if you aren't going to buy. The fabric is delicate," the other one yelled at me from across the room. I smiled. It was time. I pulled the wad of bills from my purse. Not all of it, just enough to show the thickness, the crisp color of $100 bills. I started counting them absent-mindedly like someone checking a grocery list. The silence in the store was absolute. The two girls froze solid. The sound of crisp bills rustling was the only language they understood perfectly. "Oh, excuse me, ma'am," the one who had yelled at me said, rushing over with a fake smile super glued to her face. "We didn't recognize you. Are you looking for anything in particular? We have some gorgeous sets that just arrived from Italy." I looked at her coldly, lowering my imaginary glasses down my nose. "I want that suit and the coat from the window. And I need silk blouses. No cheap polyester. And I want to try on some comfortable shoes, but made of good leather." Of course, of course. Step right into the private fitting room. We'll bring you some sparkling water, or would you prefer coffee?" "Water is fine, and I want you to call a cab for when I'm finished to be safe." I spent the next 3 hours transforming. When I looked at myself in the fitting room mirror, wearing the gray suit, the ivory silk blouse, and the new coat, Eleanor, the victim, had vanished. Standing in front of me was Eleanor Montgomery, the matriarch. The cut of the clothes hid my tired back and gave me a regal posture. I paid in cash, savoring the almost religious reverence with which they counted the money. I left my old clothes in a bag, telling them to donate it. "Is everything to your liking, Mrs. Montgomery?" the girl asked, walking me to the door where the cab was waiting. "Excellent," I replied. "And, little girl, a piece of advice. Never judge a book by its wrinkled cover. Sometimes the pages inside are made of gold." I got into the cab feeling powerful, but the clothes were just the costume. Now I needed the weapon. I went back to the hotel and asked them to send up a phone directory and a laptop borrowed from the business center. I sat at the mahogany desk in the suite. I had to find them. Not to beg them, not to ask for explanations. I had to find them so I knew exactly where to strike. Roger wasn't smart, and neither was Giselle. They were cruel, yes, but cruelty is usually the tool of the foolish. They had surely left tracks. I opened the laptop, my fingers, though clumsy from arthritis, remembered how to type. At the pharmacy, we had modernized our system years ago, and I was the first one to learn it. I searched social media. Giselle was addicted to posting her life, bragging about things she didn't own. I searched her name. Giselle the Divine. Private profile. Damn it. I searched for my grandkids. The oldest, Kevin, 15 years old. Public profile. There it was, a photo uploaded 6 hours ago. You could see an electric blue painted wall, and in the background out a window there was a very distinct water tower with red and white stripes. I smiled. I knew that tower. It was the Oak Creek neighborhood on the other side of the city. A new subdivision of prefabricated homes that look pretty on the outside but have paper-thin walls. They had moved to the Nouveau Riche area, which in reality was just the newly in debt area. I jotted the reference down in a leather-bound notebook I had bought in the hotel lobby. I have the money, I have the picture, I have the location. But I wasn't going to go there yet. No revenge is a dish best served cold, and I had the patience of someone who has waited a lifetime. I needed more information. I needed to know who owned that new house, how much they paid in rent where Roger was working now. I picked up the room phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. The number of an old customer from the pharmacy. A man who used to be a cop and now worked as a private investigator. A man I had fronted insulin for his mother for years and who owed me favors. "Talk to me," a raspy voice answered. "Sullivan, it's Eleanor the pharmacist." There was a silence on the other end. "Miss Eleanor, man?" I thought, well, I haven't seen you in a long time. How can I help you? "Are you sick?" "No, Sullivan. I'm better than ever, but I need your services. I need you to find out everything about a family that just moved to Oak Creek. Debts, contracts, habits, schedules, all of it." "That costs money, Miss Eleanor, and it takes time." "Money is not an issue," I said with a firm voice. "And time, well, I have all the time in the world. I want you to be my eyes and ears. I want to know when they breathe and when they cough." "Understood." "Who's the target?" I took a deep breath. Saying my son's name as a target left a bitter taste in my mouth like bile. But I remembered the note on the door. Without burdens. "Roger Miller and his wife Giselle." "Your son, Miss Eleanor?" Sullivan asked, his voice full of confusion. "My son died the day he left me dumped in an empty house. Sullivan, this man is just a debtor, and I am going to collect the debt." I hung up the phone, walked over to the window, and looked at the city lights beginning to turn on. Below, the cars looked like glowing ants. I felt giant. I felt dangerous. The invisibility of old age was my cloak. The gold was my sword. And my family was going to learn that a mother is either respected or feared. I poured myself a glass of wine from the minibar. I toasted my reflection in the window glass. "Cheers, Eleanor," I whispered. "The game has just begun." Sullivan felt so out of place in the Emperor Hotel suite that he didn't even dare lean his back against the Italian leather sofa. He held his crumpled hat in his hands and kept looking around as if he expected security to burst in and kick him out at any moment. I, on the other hand, was pouring tea into porcelain cups so fine the light passed right through them with the calm demeanor of someone born to rule. "Drink your tea, Sullivan. It won't bite," I told him, sliding the saucer toward him. He nodded and took a loud sip, burning his lips. Then he placed a bulging manila folder on the glass table. It was the report. My diagnosis. "Miss Eleanor, things are uglier than we thought." He began lowering his voice. "Your boy Roger isn't just a bad son. He's a terrible manager." I opened the folder. The photos were blurry, taken from a distance, but perfectly clear to my eyes accustomed to reading illegible medical prescriptions. There was the new house in the Oak Creek neighborhood. A modern build, the kind that looks like stacked shoeboxes with too much glass window and too little privacy. "Give me the symptoms, doctor," I joked, bitterly adjusting my glasses. "For starters, they paid for the move with a loan," Sullivan said, pointing at a document. "And not from a bank. Roger signed some promissory notes with Flatnose Frank. You know who that is?" I felt a shiver. Of course I knew. Frank was a loan shark from the slums who charged 20% monthly interest. And if you didn't pay, he collected it out of the health of your kneecaps. Roger had stuck his head in the lion's mouth just to indulge Giselle's delusions of grandeur. "How much?" I asked. 10 grand. For the house deposit, the moving truck, and buying some minimalist living room set the missus wanted. They're already 2 weeks behind. Frank already sent 2 goons to knock on their door yesterday. I turned the page. There were photos of Giselle. She was wearing new clothes, but in the photo where she was carrying grocery bags, I managed to spot the brand names. Bulk rice cheap noodles and not a single cut of meat. They were living on pure appearance. "And the house?" Sullivan continued, pointing to a photocopied lease agreement. "It's rented, of course. The owner is a guy named Mr. Barrett, a guy who lives out of state and is desperate to sell the property because he needs liquid cash. Roger swore to him that in 6 months he would buy the house. A lie the size of a cathedral because your son was just put on part-time at the auto dealership. He couldn't sell a tricycle, Miss Eleanor." I closed the folder. The silence in the room grew thick. There it was, the X-ray of my family. A cancer of debts, lies, and pretensions that was eating them alive. I could have felt pity. A normal mother would have felt the urge to run over payoff. Frank, fill their pantry and tell them I'm here. But I was not a normal mother. I was the woman they had dumped like an old dog, and old dogs, when they survive, learn new tricks. "Thank you, Sullivan," I said, pulling an envelope of cash from my purse. "Here are your fees and a bonus. I want you to get me 2 meetings for tomorrow." "With who, boss?" First with Flatnose Frank and second with Mr. Barrett, the owner of the house. Sullivan nearly choked on his tea. Miss Eleanor, with all due respect, Frank doesn't invite sweet old ladies over for coffee. The guy is dangerous. So am I, Sullivan, I replied, running a finger along the gold rim of my teacup. So am I. Flatnose Frank's office smelled of stale tobacco and cheap disinfectant, a mix that turned my stomach. It was in the back room of a pawn shop downtown. I walked in, leaning on my cane, wearing my camel coat, keeping a tight grip on my leather purse. Two massive guys guarding the door looked at me with a smirk and let me pass, figuring I was coming in to pawn Grandma's jewelry. Frank was counting bills behind a metal desk. He was a fat man, his skin gleaming with sweat, wearing a gold chain so thick it looked like a dog collar. "You lost little mother," he said without looking up. "We don't do charity here." "I'm not looking for charity, Mr. Frank," I said with a steady voice, taking a seat in the plastic chair across from him without waiting for an invitation. "I'm looking to do business. I'm here to buy debt." The man lifted his head. His piggy eyes scanned me up and down, lingering on the quality of my clothes and the steadiness of my gloved hands. "What debt?" "Roger Miller's. I know he owes you 10 grand plus interest, and I know you don't have the patience to collect from a starving deadbeat who doesn't have a pot to piss in." Frank let out a laugh that made his double chin jiggle. "That idiot. Yeah, I'm about to send him a physical reminder." "What are you to him?" "His rich grandma." "Let's just say I'm an investor with a vested interest in his moral solvency." I lied, keeping my face blank. "I want to buy his I owe us. I'll give you the full principal right now. The late fees and interest, I'll keep those for myself as future profit. You get your money back today without getting your hands dirty, and I handle the collection." I pulled out 5 stacks of bills bound with rubber bands from my purse. I slammed them on the table with a hard thud. The sound of money is a universal language that even brutes understand perfectly. Frank stared at the money. Then he looked at me with a mix of respect and suspicion. "You got a deal, lady. But I'm warning you, that guy is a bad payer." "I know, but I have methods you don't. I am very persuasive." 10 minutes later, I walked out of there with the original document signed by my son safely in my purse. Legally, Roger now owed me the very air he breathed, but I wasn't going to collect just yet. Oh no, I would let the debt age like fine wine, or a slow poison. My second stop was more civilized, but just as lethal. I met with Mr. Barrett's legal representative in a coffee shop near the courthouse. The owner of the house was desperate to sell. The property had minor foundation issues and needed repairs he didn't want to pay for. Roger, of course, knew nothing about this. He just saw freshly painted walls and laminate flooring. "My client is asking for 400,000 ma," the lawyer said, a young guy in a cheap suit. "I'll give you 300,000 in cash. Immediate wire transfer from a secure account," I countered while breaking a shortbread cookie with my fingers. "And with one condition. The current lease agreement stays, but the title transfers to an LLC. Apothecary Investments. No one can know that I am the owner. The tenant will keep depositing the rent into the exact same account, which will now be managed by you on my behalf." The lawyer hesitated. 300 was low, but the offer of immediate cash is the siren song of real estate deals. "If we close today, it's a deal. But Mrs. Montgomery, why all the mystery with the tenants?" I smiled. A grandmother wolf smile. "Let's just say I like to supervise my investments from the shadows, and I want to see if they are reliable payers before introducing myself." That very afternoon, we signed the papers in front of a notary. I now owned their roof and their debt. I was the god of their little cardboard universe, and they didn't even know it. 2 weeks passed. The silent execution began on a Tuesday. According to Sullivan's report, Giselle had organized a housewarming dinner to impress the neighbors in the subdivision. She wanted to get on the HOA committee. She had spent the last bit of money she had on a cheap catering service and forced Roger to ask for an advance at work, which they denied to buy wine. I was sitting in my hotel room with the phone in my hand. I dialed the electric company. As the new property owner, I had certain privileges. "Good afternoon," I said in my sweetest, most concerned voice. "This is the representative for Apothecary Investments, the owners of the property at 45 Oak Street." "Yes. Listen, we've detected a potential fault in the main wiring that could cause a short circuit. It's a severe fire hazard. I need you to cut the power supply immediately for a safety inspection." "Yes, right now. No, do not notify the tenants. It's a technical emergency. I don't want them messing with anything." I hung up. I looked at the clock. It was 7 in the evening. Giselle's dinner party should be just starting. I would have loved to be a fly on that wall. The next day, Sullivan brought me the details with a twisted smile. It was a disaster, Miss Eleanor. The power went out right as they were serving the lasagna. They had to eat by candlelight, but not the romantic kind, the emergency kind. The neighbors left early because it was hot and the AC was dead. Giselle was hysterical, screaming that she was going to sue the electric company. And the best part, I asked, feeling a guilty pleasure rush through my veins. Roger tried to call the owner, that Barrett guy, to complain, but the number is disconnected. The lawyer sent him an email saying the property changed hands and any complaints have to be submitted in writing to the P.O. Box of Apothecary Investments. And did they write? Yeah, right, here's the letter. Sullivan handed me a crumpled page. Roger's handwriting was shaky. He threatened he played the victim. He said they paid a fortune in rent and deserved respect. I laughed. It was the first time I had genuinely laughed in a long time. So, what do we do now, boss? I got up and walked over to the window. Below, the city continued its frantic rhythm. I felt powerful, yes, but I also felt a strange void in my chest. I was playing with them like a cat with injured mice. Was it justice? Yes. They had condemned me to darkness and hunger. I was just feeding them a dose of their own medicine. Now, Sullivan, we tightened the financial screws. I pulled Frank's IOUs from my safe. Take this to an aggressive legal collection agency. I want them to start calling Roger at work at all hours. Have them notify him that his debt has been sold and that we demand immediate payment, or we'll start seizing assets. Seizing assets? But if the assets are yours, Miss Eleanor, you own the house. Exactly. But the furniture isn't mine. That minimalist living room set, the giant TV, the stereo, all of that is seizable. I want them to feel the walls closing in on them. I want Roger to break into a cold sweat every time the phone rings. And Giselle. For Giselle, I have something special. I pulled a small business card from my purse. It was from an exclusive fabric store where I had bought my new dresses. Giselle fancies herself a seamstress and designer. She was always criticizing my mending, claiming she had an eye for fashion. Well, I found out she's trying to sell clothes online to make a quick buck. She buys cheap rags and sews fake labels on them. I want you to place a huge order with her. Evening gowns. Tell her you're a middleman for a boutique. Get her excited. Make her spend money she doesn't have on materials. And then, when she has it all ready, you cancel the order. You vanish. You leave her stuck with the merchandise and the debt from the fabrics. Sullivan looked at me with a respect that bordered on fear. You don't play around, Miss Eleanor. Those are war tactics. They declared war the day they taped that note to my door, Sullivan. I am merely finishing the battle. That night, I dreamed of my old pharmacy. I dreamed I was preparing a master formula. I weighed the ingredients with millimeter precision. A pinch of fear, 2 grams of uncertainty, an ounce of desperation, all mixed together in the mortar of loneliness. I woke up before dawn. I felt strong. My arthritis pain seemed to have vanished, as if the adrenaline of revenge were the ultimate painkiller. I went to the desk and opened the ledger I had started keeping. In the asset column was my gold, my security. In the liability column was the dignity they had stolen from me. There was still a long way to go to balance the scales. Mid-morning, my phone rang. It was the lawyer for the shell company I had created. Mrs. Montgomery, we have a problem. Or an opportunity, depending on how you look at it. Tell me. Your tenant, Mr. Miller, just called management. He says he can't pay the full rent this month. He's asking for an extension. He says his mother is very ill and that he's had heavy medical expenses. I gripped the receiver until my knuckles turned white. Using my name? Using me as an excuse for his failures when he didn't even know if I was dead or alive. Roger's audacity knew no bounds. Lying about the mother he abandoned just to get pity from an anonymous landlord. The white-hot fury crawled up my spine again, fast and burning. Not a single day of extension, I said in an icy voice. Tell him the contract is strict. If he doesn't pay by the 5th, the eviction process begins. And tell him something else. Tell him the owner of the company is a very strict older woman who despises liars. Understood. Do you want us to proceed with the eviction notice if he misses the payment? Draft the paperwork, but don't send it just yet. I want him to suffer the anticipation. The fear of the blow hurts worse than the blow itself. I hung up. I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back was no longer the sweet little old lady. Her lips were a tight line, her gaze hard. I was turning into something new, something forged in the fire of resentment. I grabbed my purse. I was going to take a walk. I wanted to pass by the car dealership where Roger worked. I wanted to see him from across the street. I wanted to see the worry on his face. I wanted to see him loosen his cheap tie because he felt like he couldn't breathe. I walked out of the hotel and the doorman bowed to me. "Good morning, Mrs. Montgomery, taxi." "No, I'll walk today. I need to see the real world." I walked among the crowds, invisible and powerful all at once. I held the control of their lives in the palm of my wrinkled hand. I could crush them right now, but that would be too fast. They had to understand. They had to learn what it means to be truly alone without a roof, without a safety net. They had to find their way just like they wished for me. Only I was making damn sure their way was full of rocks, thorns, and dead ends. And at the end of that maze, when they had absolutely nowhere left to turn, I would be there waiting for them. Not as the victim, but as destiny. The phone in the Emperor Hotel suite rang at exactly 9 in the morning. It was a civilized hour for bad news, I thought, as I set my coffee cup down on its porcelain saucer. On the other end of the line was Mr. Barnes, the man managing my shell company. "Mrs. Montgomery," he said with a grave voice. The fish took the bait and swallowed it down to the sinker. I felt a cold pang of satisfaction in my stomach, much like when you take a strong antacid. "Give me the details, counselor. Don't skimp on the symptoms." "Your son, excuse me, the tenant, Roger Miller, just received the wage garnishment notice at the dealership. He caused a massive scene. He screamed it was a mistake that his mother had money." Barnes paused awkwardly. "They fired him, ma'am. Management doesn't want employees with legal trouble dragging debt collectors into the showroom." I closed my eyes for a moment. Roger, my boy. The kid whose scraped knees I used to cure with mercurochrome and soft blows was now on the street. No job, no money, and soon no roof. A piece of my mother's heart wanted to leap up, run out, and save him. But my mind, that pharmacist's mind that knows some gangrenes can only be cured by amputation, kept me firmly in my chair. "And the wife?" I asked, hardening my voice. "Giselle is having a breakdown. The phantom fabric supplier is demanding payment for the materials she already cut and ruined. No one is buying her dresses. They're cornered, ma'am. They've called the office 3 times begging for mercy on the rent." "Good," I said, smoothing the skirt of my gray suit. "It's time for a house call. Do you want me to go over with the eviction order?" "No, Mr. Barnes. I want you to tell them that the property owner, the president of Apothecary Investments, will personally inspect the premises before signing the eviction notice. Tell them it's their one and only chance to negotiate. Schedule it for 5 in the afternoon. I want both of them there. And the kids, make sure the kids are not there. I don't want my grandchildren to watch their parents crumble." "Understood. Shall I pick you up?" "No, I'll take my own transportation. I will meet you there." I hung up the phone, stood up, and went to the full-length mirror. The woman staring back at me had absolutely nothing to do with the old lady crying on an empty kitchen floor a month ago. My white hair was styled in an elegant cut. My hands boasted an impeccable manicure, and around my neck hung a thick gold chain holding one of the gold eagles. As I said, a constant reminder of my source of power. I grabbed my cane, the one that now had a silver handle, and my camel coat. "Let's go, Eleanor," I whispered to myself. "Today, you are going to teach the most expensive lesson of their lives." The taxi I hired wasn't just any car. I requested the hotel's executive service, a black town car, sleek and silent as a panther. The driver opened the door for me, and I settled into the leather seat, feeling the air conditioning dry the cold sweat on my palms. Because I was nervous. Not out of fear of them, but out of fear of my own reaction. Would I break when I saw them cry, or would I enjoy their pain too much? The drive to the Oak Creek neighborhood was like traveling between two worlds. We left the tree-lined avenues and glass high-rises behind and entered the dusty streets of the new development, where the houses were identical and the trees were barely dry twigs staked into the sidewalk. As we turned the corner onto Oak Street, I saw the house. Number 45. The electric blue paint that my grandson Kevin loved so much already looked faded under the unforgiving afternoon sun. There was a strange silence on the block, as if the neighbors knew a tragedy was brewing right there. The car pulled up to the front door. Mr. Barnes was already there waiting for me, standing next to his sedan with a briefcase tucked under his arm. He saw me arrive and hurried over to open my door. "Mrs. Montgomery." He greeted me with a slight bow that did not go unnoticed by the curtain shifting in the living room window. I stepped out of the car. The click of my leather heels echoed on the concrete. I planted my cane into the ground with authority. Are they ready? I asked. Are they terrified? Barnes replied quietly. They think I'm the executioner and you're the judge. They aren't wrong. We walked up to the entrance. Before Barnes could even ring the bell, the door swung open. Roger appeared in the threshold. He looked awful. He had lost weight. He had dark bags under his eyes and was wearing a wrinkled dress shirt trying to look formal. Behind him, Giselle was wringing her hands, her makeup smeared, and her usually perfect hair tied up in a messy ponytail. Good afternoon, Mr. Barnes, Roger said with a trembling voice, not even looking at me, yet his eyes fixed on the lawyer. Please come in. We are willing to come to an agreement. Barnes stepped aside with solemnity. Mr. Miller, Mrs. Miller, allow me to introduce the owner of the property and the holder of your debt, Mrs. Montgomery. Roger snapped his head toward me. His eyes went so wide I thought they were going to pop out of their sockets. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Giselle let out a choked gasp and covered her mouth with both hands. Mom, Roger stammered, taking a step back as if he had just seen a ghost. Mom! I didn't smile. I didn't offer a single gesture of affection. I stood right there in the doorway, blocking the sunlight, casting my long shadow over the laminate floor of their minimalist living room. Good afternoon, Roger, I said. My voice came out clear, powerful, without a trace of age's tremor. Are you going to invite me into my house, or do I have to wait out here like a beggar? But, Giselle stuttered, looking at my coat, my jewelry, the luxury car idling behind me. We don't understand. You were. I was what Giselle... I walked into the house without asking permission, forcing them to step out of my way. The smell of confinement and stress was palpable. I was lost, I was dead, I was finding my way. I walked over to the sofa, that gray modern piece of furniture they had bought with the loan shark's money, and I sat dead in the center like a queen on her throne. I rested my hands on the silver handle of my cane and stared them down. Sit, I ordered. They obeyed instantly, collapsing into two dining chairs across from me like scolded children in the principal's office. Mom, for God's sake, what is all this? Roger tried to scrape together some composure, but the sweat on his forehead betrayed him. The lawyer said the owner was coming. Apothecary Investments. I am Apothecary Investments. I cut him off sharply. I am the owner of this house, Roger. I bought the property a month ago when your old landlord was desperate to sell. And I am also the owner of the IOUs you signed with Frank. I bought your debt. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Roger went pale, almost green. Giselle looked at me with a mix of horror and calculation, her eyes scanning my expensive clothes, trying to do the math. That's impossible, Giselle whispered. You didn't have any money. You sold the pharmacy years ago. You spent it all. You were a burden. I slammed my cane into the floor. The sound cracked like a gunshot. Watch your mouth, little girl, I snapped at her. The only burden here was you two. For years you sucked my blood, my energy, and my savings. And when you thought I had nothing left, you threw me in the trash like a piece of old furniture. I leaned forward, locking my eyes onto my son's. Do you remember the note, Roger? We hope you find your way, Mom. Well, I found it. Turns out my way was paved with what you two were too stupid to see. What are you talking about? He asked, his voice cracking. About the old house? The house you left empty? You took the curtains, the light bulbs, even the trash, but you never looked down. You never had the curiosity or the respect for the past to know what your father and I built. I reached into my purse and pulled out one of the gold eagles. I tossed it onto the glass coffee table. The gold coin spun on its edge, gleaming with a hypnotic brilliance, making a pure metallic ringing sound that echoed off the cheap walls of the house. Both of their eyes locked onto the coin. Gold, Roger whispered. That's real. 50 of those, Roger. 50 ounces of gold that your father hid under the pantry floor. I was sitting right on top of them while you made me feel useless. I was sitting on them the day you left me completely alone. Giselle made an instinctive move to touch the coin, but I was faster. I pinned her hand down with the tip of my cane. She yanked her fingers back as if she had been burned. Don't touch it, I said. That is not yours. It was never yours. Roger grabbed his head, pulling at his own hair. He started crying. An ugly, loud cry of desperation and belated regret. Mom, forgive me. We didn't know what to do. We were desperate. The debts were drowning us. We thought you'd be better off with your sister, that she would take care of you. Liar! I screamed and my voice rattled the windows. Stop lying. You told me to go figure out life on my own. You didn't even give me the address. And the worst part, Roger, the thing I will never forgive you for is what you did 2 weeks ago. Roger looked up confused through his tears. What? You used my name. You told the property manager you couldn't pay the rent because your mother was desperately ill. You killed me and made me sick whenever it was convenient for you. You used me as an excuse for your own incompetence while I was alive, healthy, and watching your every move. Roger lowered his head, defeated. He had no defense. The shame was a heavy blanket over his shoulders. So what now? Giselle asked, her voice barely a thread. Are you going to throw us out on the street? Is that what you want, revenge? I leaned back into the sofa, recovering my regal posture. I looked around the pretentious, loveless house. I could, I said calmly. I have the signed eviction notice in the lawyer's briefcase. I have the defaulted I owe us. I could take your furniture, the car, and leave you on the curb with your trash bags exactly like you did to me. It would be poetic justice, wouldn't it? No one answered. Only Roger's ragged breathing broke the silence. But, I continued, dragging the word out, unlike you, I don't forget that blood is blood. And I will not allow my grandchildren, Kevin and little Sophie, to sleep under a bridge because of their parents' sheer uselessness. I saw a flash of hope in Giselle's eyes. Grave mistake. Don't get confused, Giselle. This isn't charity. This is a restructuring. I signaled to Mr. Barnes. He pulled a legal document from his briefcase and placed it on the table next to the gold coin. These are the new terms, I said. First, you stay in the house, but no longer as tenants in control of your own destiny. The lease agreement is canceled. As of today, you live here under a conditional use agreement. What does that mean? Roger asked. It means I'm lending you the house, but I hold the keys. I can walk in whenever I please. And if I see a single dirty plate, a single bottle of liquor, or hear a single shouting match, you are gone. They nodded, completely mute. Second, the debt. The $10,000 plus interest you owe Frank, you now owe to me. And you are going to pay me back every single penny. But Mom, I got fired, Roger whimpered. I know, I'm the one who got you fired. I admitted without blinking. Roger stared at me in horror, but I kept going. That job was garbage and you were mediocre at it. Tomorrow you're going to show up at the warehouse for Main Street Pharmacy downtown. I spoke with the owner, an old friend. They need a loader and someone to scrub the shelves. You are going to start from the bottom, Roger. You are going to sweat. And 70% of your paycheck will go directly into my account to pay off your debt. Roger opened his mouth to protest, to say he was a sales manager, not a loader, but my glare shut him up. He knew he had no choice. And you, Giselle. I turned to her, she trembled. Your fantasies of being a designer and hosting dinner parties are over. Those poorly made dresses you have sitting in there, you're going to rip out the seams. You're going to sell the fabric as scraps, and you're going to get a real job. They need a cashier at the supermarket on the corner. I already checked. Giselle turned red with indignation. I am not going to be a cashier. What will the neighbors say? The neighbors don't care about you, Giselle. And if you don't like it, there's the door. You can leave on your own, but my grandchildren stay here under my supervision, and Roger stays here working to pay me back. It's your choice, a cashier with a roof or a diva on the street. Giselle looked down, biting her lip until it almost bled. She gave a slight nod. Third, I said, standing up from the sofa. My knees popped a little, but I didn't let it show. I want to see my grandchildren every single weekend. They will come have lunch with me at the hotel or wherever I decide. And you will treat me with the respect owed to the matriarch of this family. No more calling me old woman. No more ignoring me. When I speak, you listen. I picked up the gold coin from the table and dropped it back into my purse. Are we clear? I asked. Yes, Mom, Roger said, his voice breaking. He stood up and tried to approach me, maybe to hug me, maybe to fall to his knees. I lifted my cane and planted it squarely against his chest, stopping him dead in his tracks. The silver tip gleamed against his dirty shirt. No, I said softly. Not yet. Hugs are earned, Roger. Forgiveness requires work. Today we only did business. I turned toward the door. Mr. Barnes gathered the signed documents and followed me out. Before stepping outside, I paused and looked at the house one last time. It didn't feel like a foreign, hostile place anymore. Now it felt like exactly what it was, my property managed by employees who required heavy supervision. "Oh, one last thing," I said without turning around. "I am hosting Christmas dinner this year, and it will be at the Emperor Hotel. Make sure you have decent clothes by then. If you work hard, maybe I'll buy you something." I walked out to the street where the sun was beginning to set, staining the sky a violent orange. The air felt lighter. I got into the luxury car and closed the door, shutting out the dust and the misery of my relatives. As the car pulled away, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw Roger and Giselle standing in the doorway, small hunched, watching me drive off. They were no longer the cruel giants that dominated my life. They were just two lost people who had just collided with reality. I pulled my ledger from my purse. On today's page, I wrote with my fountain pen, "Moral debt partially settled. Total control." I stroked the gold eagle hanging around my neck. The metal was warm against my skin. Revenge, I discovered, wasn't a dish served cold. It was a dish served hot, nutritious, and on a solid gold plate, but only for those who had the courage to sit at the head of the table. "To the hotel, please," I told the driver, "and put on some upbeat music. Today, I am celebrating my rebirth." The car glided through the streets, taking me back to my ivory tower, while back there in the electric blue house, the true education of my family had just begun. 6 months have passed since I decided to stop being a piece of furniture and become the master of the board. December arrived with that dry cold that seeps right into your bones, but this time it didn't find me shivering under a threadbare blanket in someone else's house. It found me on the terrace of the presidential suite at the Emperor Hotel, wrapped in a cashmere shawl that cost more than Roger made in a month during his best days watching the Christmas lights decorate the city below. The air smelled like pine and roasted chestnuts. That smell used to make me nostalgic, made me think of my late Arthur and the dinners I cooked for a family that didn't deserve me. Now the smell of Christmas smells like victory, like a positive balance sheet. I adjusted my glasses and checked my wristwatch. A delicate piece of white gold. There was half an hour left until dinner. My family should be arriving soon. I smiled, thinking about that word. Family. It was no longer an unconditional blood tie. Now it was a corporate structure that I managed with an iron fist and a silk glove. I stood up and walked over to the full-length mirror. The Eleanor staring back at me had a straight spine. The silver toner they applied at the hotel salon made my hair shine like the moon, and the midnight blue velvet dress hid the years and projected pure authority. "You're ready, old girl," I told myself, winking. "Today we close the fiscal year." I went down to the private dining room I had reserved. I didn't want to eat in the main restaurant. I needed privacy for what I had to say. The Viceroy room was perfect. Red damask upholstered walls, a long mahogany table, and a roaring fireplace. When I walked in, the waiter stood at attention. "Good evening, Mrs. Montgomery. Is everything to your liking?" asked the maitre d', a man who already knew I wouldn't tolerate a single smudged glass. "Excellent, Richard. Pour the wine. The good stuff. My guest won't know the difference from vinegar, but I will." At 8 o'clock on the dot, the door opened. They walked in single file like scared little ducklings. First Roger, then Giselle, and finally my grandkids Kevin and little Sophie. I stood at the head of the table, leaning on my silver-handled cane, observing the details. Always the details. Roger had changed. He looked thinner, yes, but the bloat from the alcohol and the lazy lifestyle had vanished from his face. He was wearing a suit I recognized. It was an old one I had bought him 5 years ago, but it was clean and pressed. His hands, which used to be soft and idle, now had calluses and tiny cuts. The marks of his labor at the pharmacy warehouse. Marks of dignity, even if he still saw it as a punishment. Giselle was the surprise. She wasn't wearing anything new. She had on a simple black dress I had seen 1,000 times, but she had added a white lace collar that I was almost certain she had sewn herself. No fake jewelry, no heavy makeup. She had bags under her eyes, the bags of a cashier who had worked double shifts in December, but her gaze was no longer arrogant. It was cautious. "Good evening, Mother," Roger said, stepping up to kiss my hand. Not my cheek, my hand. We had established clear boundaries. "Good evening, Roger, Giselle, children." My grandkids ran to hug me. I allowed contact with them. Kevin, with his 15 years and teenage rebellion, squeezed me tight. Sophie hung from my neck. "Grandma, you smell so good," the little girl exclaimed. "I smell like success, sweetheart," I whispered in her ear. "Sit down. We have a lot to celebrate." The dinner proceeded with a strange formality. At first, the only sound was the clinking of silver cutlery against porcelain. Roger and Giselle ate hungrily but politely terrified that if they made one wrong move, I would pull the plates out from under them. "How is work at the warehouse, son?" I asked while cutting my filet mignon. Roger wiped his mouth with the linen napkin before answering. "Hard, Mom. The year-end inventory is brutal. I had to carry boxes of cough syrup all day. Mr. Mitchell says I'm slow, but that I'm organized." I nodded, satisfied. Mitchell was my friend, but he didn't hand out free compliments to anyone. Order is the foundation of wealth, Roger. If you can organize boxes, you can organize your life. And the payments? On time, Mrs. Montgomery, Giselle chimed in, looking down at her plate. 70% of his check and 50% of mine were deposited into your account yesterday. I brought the receipts. She pulled a small envelope from her purse and placed it on the table, sliding it toward me between the candelabras. I took it without opening it. "I trust the bank, Giselle, but I am glad to see you've learned discipline. And you? How is the cash register?" Giselle sighed, and for a second I saw the vain woman try to claw her way out, but she repressed it. "It's exhausting. People are rude. They scream at you if the price is wrong. They throw the money at you. My feet ache from standing 8 hours straight." "Welcome to the real world," I said, taking a sip of wine. "That's exactly how I felt behind the pharmacy counter for 40 years to pay for your whims. People are rude, yes, but the money you earn with those aching feet is worth more than any handout I could ever give you." There was a tense silence, but not a hostile one. It was the silence of learning. When dessert arrived, a Yule log drenched in chocolate, I decided it was time for the final reveal. I gave a signal and the waiter stepped out, pulling the double doors shut. "Very well," I said, placing my hands on the table. "We have reached the end of this turbulent year. You tried to throw me away. I rebuilt myself. Now the accounts are settled, but a family, or what's left of one, isn't run exclusively on ledgers." I pulled 4 gift boxes from under my chair. They weren't big. They didn't have extravagant bows. "For you, Kevin." I handed him a flat box. The boy opened it. Inside was a savings account passbook in his name and a small gold coin, a fractional gold eagle. "Grandma, this is real gold," he said, his eyes wide. "It's your future, Kevin. That account holds a college fund. I am the trustee until you turn 18. But the gold is yours. I want you to keep it. I want you to feel its weight. I want you to understand that money isn't just paper you blow on designer sneakers. Money is security. It's freedom. Don't be like your father. Be like your grandfather, Arthur." Roger lowered his head in shame, but he didn't say a word. He knew I was right. "For you, Sophie." I handed the little girl a box with a professional watercolor set and sable hairbrushes. "I've seen your drawings from school. You have talent. Don't let anyone ever tell you that art is useless, but don't let anyone support you either. Paint your own world, my girl." Then I looked at the couple sitting across from me. The tension dialed up. "Roger, Giselle, there is no gold for you. Not yet. Gold is earned, not inherited by divine right." I handed them 2 envelopes. Roger opened his. It was a legal document. He read it frowning, and then he looked at me in disbelief. "A life insurance policy. A life insurance policy in my name," I corrected him. "Where you two are the beneficiaries, but with a trust clause. If I die tomorrow, you don't get a single dime in cash. The money goes to an administrator who will pay for the kids' education and a modest monthly stipend for you only as long as you maintain steady employment." "You're protecting us from ourselves," Roger muttered. For the first time in years, I saw admiration in his eyes, not just fear. "Someone had to do it. Since I failed to teach you that when you were a boy, I am teaching it to you now that you are an old man." Giselle opened her envelope. Inside was a brochure and a payment receipt. "Advanced Tailoring and Industrial Pattern Making course," she read aloud. "I saw the collar on your dress, Giselle. You have skilled hands even if you've only used them for idleness. Stop sewing fake labels onto cheap clothes. Learn how to make real clothes. The course starts in January. It's already paid for. It's at night, so it won't interfere with your cashier job." Giselle stroked the paper, her eyes filled with tears. This time they were real tears. "Thank you, Eleanor," she said, her voice cracking. No one has ever invested in me. They only ever gave me money to shut me up or to look pretty." "Beauty fades, child. A trade lasts a lifetime." I leaned back in my chair, feeling a sweet exhaustion. I had achieved the impossible. I hadn't just reclaimed my fortune and my dignity. I had reclaimed something much harder. I had straightened the crooked tree of my family. With harsh blows of reality, yes, but it was straight. Now listen to me carefully, I said, hardening my voice one last time. The fact that we are having dinner here does not mean the debt is cleared. Tomorrow, Roger, you go back to lifting boxes. Tomorrow, Giselle, you go back to the cash register. The house is still mine and I still hold the keys. But if you keep this up, if you prove you are made of the timber, I think you are maybe next year we can talk about partners instead of employees. Roger stood up, walked around the table, and stood next to me. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his rough, calloused hand. Thank you, Mom, for not letting us find our way to the bottom of a cliff. Thank you for forcing us to walk yours. I patted his hand. It was the only gesture of affection I allowed myself. Sit down and eat. The chocolate is melting. Dinner ended amid timid laughter and stories about the kids' school. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like the old piece of furniture in the corner. I was the center of gravity. I was the sun around which these wayward planets orbited. When they left, I stayed alone in the dining room for a moment. The waiters started clearing the table. I walked over to the window. I pulled the velvet pouch from my purse, the one where I kept my lucky coin. The very first gold eagle I pulled out of that rusted toolbox. I held it up against the moonlight. I thought about the cruel note they had left on the door. We hope you find your way, Mom. That sentence, which was meant to be my death warrant, had become my treasure map. I'd found my way, yes, but I had also discovered something far more important, that old age is not the end of the road unless you decide to just sit down and wait for death. I had decided to stand up. I had decided to fight. And in that fight, I discovered that my 78 years were not a burden. They were my armor. Arthur's gold gave me economic power, true. But it was my cunning, my experience as a pharmacist, my ability to measure the exact doses of punishment and reward that gave me true power. I walked out of the dining room and crossed the hotel lobby. The pianist was playing a soft melody. The guests greeted me with respect as I passed by. Good evening, Mrs. Montgomery. Good evening. I went up to my suite, kicked off my orthopedic shoes, and sank my feet into the Persian rug. I poured myself a small glass of anise just the way my husband liked it. I sat in the armchair facing the bay window. Below, the city continued its frantic rhythm, full of people rushing, buying, going into debt, living on appearances. Out there somewhere in the new development, my son and my daughter-in-law were sleeping exhausted, worried about waking up early for work. They were alive, they were learning, and I was fulfilled. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. I no longer saw an old woman. I saw a matriarch. I saw a woman who had turned abandonment into an empire and loneliness into sovereignty. I raised my glass to my own reflection. Cheers, Eleanor, I whispered. The climb was brutal, but the view from the top is unbeatable. I drank the anise in one gulp, feeling the heat travel down my throat, comforting and strong. Tomorrow I would go to the bank to check the yields on my investments. The day after tomorrow, maybe I would buy that commercial storefront I saw downtown to open a haberdashery and let Giselle run it once she finished her course. I had plans. I had a future. I set the glass on the table and turned off the light, leaving myself with only the glow of the city and the comforting weight of gold in my memory. I crawled into bed, into those Egyptian cotton sheets that smelled of lavender. And I closed my eyes with a smile that wouldn't fade all night, because in the end, they were right. I found my way, and it turned out to be a road paved with pure gold and iron will. Please note that the story you have just heard is intended strictly for educational and inspirational purposes designed to spark reflection on how we navigate relationships, boundaries, and personal resilience. Eleanor's journey is a powerful reminder that our value is not determined by how others treat us, but by how we respond when we are pushed to the brink. In our own lives, we often allow society, or even our closest relatives, to assign us an expiration date, making us feel invisible or burdensome when we face adversity or simply grow older. The greatest lesson we can apply here is the absolute necessity of self-worth and the enforcement of healthy boundaries. Eleanor teaches us that true love is not about enabling destructive behavior. Sometimes the most profound act of care is allowing people to face the harsh consequences of their actions. To build a better life, we must stop rescuing those who refuse to respect us and start investing that energy into rebuilding our own foundation. You are never too old, too broken, or too betrayed to rewrite the rules of your life and demand the respect you deserve. When I look deeply into Eleanor's journey, I don't just see a tale of sweet revenge. I see a profound masterpiece about reclaiming human dignity. We live in a world that is obsessed with youth, often discarding the elderly, as if their wisdom has an expiration date. Eleanor shatters this illusion, proving that the human spirit only sharpens with the grindstone of time and adversity. Her story resonates with me because it highlights a painful truth about unconditional love. Sometimes loving your family doesn't mean giving them endless handouts that feed their weaknesses. True compassion often requires the courage to deliver harsh lessons that force people to stand on their own 2 feet. Eleanor didn't destroy her son and daughter-in-law. She dismantled their destructive illusions to save their souls. She replaced their empty arrogance with the quiet pride of honest hard work. This is the highest form of humanistic love, the kind that sacrifices temporary peace to build permanent character. I believe we can all apply this to our own lives by refusing to be victims of our circumstances. When the world leaves you an empty house, you must dig deep to find the gold hidden within your own resilience. We must set boundaries that demand respect not just from strangers, but from those we hold dear. Your value does not diminish because someone else is too blind to see it. Every hardship is an invitation to redesign your destiny with wisdom and an iron will. Ultimately, true empowerment comes when we transform our deepest pain into a legacy of strength, teaching others how to truly live by the example we set. Disclaimer and liability. Waiver. The commentary and lessons drawn from this story are provided solely for educational, motivational, and entertainment purposes. They do not constitute professional, legal, financial, or psychological advice. The application of these concepts is strictly at the listener's own risk and discretion. The creator assumes no liability for any personal decisions, actions, or consequences resulting from the interpretation of this content.